Hello, everybody. Welcome to Creative Goo. I'm Harry, and I'm your host. And this show is sponsored by Gooey Cube. If you don't know who Gooey Cube is, that would be a shock. But in case you don't, Gooey Cube is the creator of the world of Zayate and several adventures for the great game of 5th edition. So if you don't know what 5e is, again, I'm shocked that you're here, but welcome. Welcome, Conan D. Welcome, 491 Phantom. It's great to see you here. Love to have as many people as possible joining our stream. Again, I'm Harry. You'll find me on Facebook as Harry's 3D Sculpting. I have a Facebook page for that. I will drop that in. And I also can be found on my mini factory under Harry's 3D Sculpting if you look for me. I'll drop the links into chat here in just a second. Hey, Geeky, nice to see you, Valley Girl. Greetings. Love to see all of you join the stream. As I mentioned last week, we want this to be very interactive. I monitor chat pretty actively. I'm looking for your questions, looking for your comments, and seeing where we can take this stream. Speaking of this stream, we are Creative Goo, and our topics are all about the creative aspects of tabletop gaming. I focus mostly on sculpting. I make 3D models, print them out, paint them, and then put them on the table to scare my players or for them to use as the characters that they play with. So that's really the area I focus on, although I do other things. In future streams, we will certainly want to talk to people about their, creative things that they do and how they want to interact with the game and how creative they can be when it talks about role playing. So, again, let me get those links to you guys if you're interested. Here's my mini factory. Let me drop this in the chat. And what you can find on my mini factory are PDF files and other gaming things, but it's really focused on miniatures. So STL files for 3D printing at home. There is a link to another game or another company that prints the models for you and sends them to you. I'm playing around with that to see if that's useful. I'm also thinking of working with somebody here in the GUI community that has 3D printers that could maybe print on demand for everyone. So if you're interested, reach out to me and we can talk about other ways to do it. So here's my Facebook page. I post, stuff I'm working on, stuff I'm releasing, and everything on that Facebook page. If you don't know how to find Gooey Cube, it's gooeycube.com. They have a shop. You can buy all their products. You can even find some of the physical miniatures I've sculpted for the world of Zayate. So hopefully those links are useful to you. And let's see, I can close that window and see what else we can talk about. Again, this is all about creativity in gaming. Obviously, you can use all this creativity in other places. There's adjacent things that people do. I know there are people that make really cool shot glasses that you might like. Mama Zola's Emporium has cool stuff like that. There's other people that do dice bags and things that you might use with your gaming, and I'd love to have some of them join the stream and share their passion. So hopefully we'll see more of them join us, and we can have that go on. Let's see. What else can I share? So this episode today, in a few minutes, I'm going to be talking specifically about 3D modeling, 3D sculpting, the process of creating these models in digital form. And then in a future episode, I'll talk about printing them. So we'll have focused discussions about that. Future episodes, in addition to 3D printing, I'm planning to do something talking about the actual physical sculpting. If people like that, it's now more of an art form. It's not used as much for producing miniatures for people, but individual companies still do that. There's some really, really good companies and good artists that still sculpt physically. We mold it. They mold it, I should say. I'm not involved. They mold it and then produce metal miniatures or resin miniatures for you to buy. I do plan on having a miniature painting session, probably more than one. I'm still working out how I can do that on the stream. The room I paint in is different from all my studio where I have my cameras and stuff, so I have to work on that solution. But Phantom, I do plan on going through mini painting. Some of the changes since I started painting, I even have kind of a progression. I showed a little bit of that previously, but what my painting looked like in the old days and what it looks like now. But I can talk about some of the tips and tricks. So if people really do have interest in miniature painting, I can certainly talk through that. I am not the best painter in the U.S., certainly not globally. There's some really, really fantastic talent, and maybe some of them would be willing to come in and talk about even more tips and tricks. There's lots of YouTube videos and things like that you can look at, but I'm happy to share what I know and the things I do. I paint to what's called tabletop quality, and then sometimes a little better than that if I really like the miniature I'm working on. It just really depends. The other thing I'd love to share with people is homemade terrain that I do for my games and the kinds of things I've done. I do love Dwarven Forge. For many people, that's an expensive proposition. And then there's the issue of storing it. A lot of the things I make, I might leave on the shelf, but I try and make things that I can fold flat and put away. And I can talk through that just a little bit. So those are some of the things that are coming. And I'd love to hear any questions you guys have about that stuff. But I do want to shift gears and talk a little bit about modeling and sculpting in 3 dimensions inside your computer. There's been some other technological advancements, and I can talk about those too. But the first thing I want to do is explain there's a difference between 3D modeling and 3D sculpting. The lines are blurring currently because the software that was traditionally modeling is adding sculpting features, and the software that was traditionally handling sculpting is adding modeling features, and so there's a lot of blending. The primary difference is how you approach the work. So in a modeling software, you are moving the pixels directly. So usually you start with a box or a cylinder or some kind of object, and then you manipulate that object to get the shape you want. Or you add multiple objects. And so this would commonly be used for hard surface modeling, it's called. But the best example I can give you is if you're going to make a table inside your computer, you're going to use either rectangles, or I should say cubes that you elongate. I don't know what that shape is called. Cylinders, maybe, for the legs of the table, and then a modified cube for the top of the table. It's is sound not working? Okay, so I will make sure and project my voice. Um, Unfortunately, if I get the mic too close, then I'm going to have problems later when I sculpt. So I was trying to get used to having the microphone a little further away so I can show you stuff on my screen. We will make it work. So if it starts to drop out, make sure you holler, and I will adjust so that you can hear me. I know that last week there was a bit of that up and down as well. So while I have a really good microphone, even with the gain turned up, for some reason, if I turn my head or my voice drops, my voice can drop. Sometimes you just lose the sound. I will do my best to yell at you, Geeky, absolutely. I will project my voice for sure. So let me go back to that. So box modeling is what it's called, but basically, and I'll show you that here in a second. I'll bring up my software because it has both features and you can see what I mean. But box modeling, you're usually adding shapes and manipulating shapes to accomplish your end goal. So it's very much used in hard surface, which is usually things like a table or a car or a spaceship. Those are all hard surface projects. Now, sculpting software tries to remove the math and the architecture and the engineering from the process where you're just modeling like you would with clay. And so you're dealing with shapes and form and then eventually surface detail. And so it was originally designed for character, creature concepts, organic material is what you would sculpt. And that's where, of course, I live. I love the organic aspects. I can do hard surface, but I prefer the organic. And so the sculpting software was more important for me. And ZBrush, the tool I've mentioned before, is the top on that sculpting pyramid. It's the most feature rich. It's been around the longest. And it was revolutionary in giving you the ability to pretend you're working in clay, basically. And so that's the difference between the two. And so depending on what you want to do, you may choose a different tool for it. Or like I have ZBrush, where it has both box modeling tools and it has the other tools you might need. So let's see. Is there anything you guys would like to see as I'm opening up ZBrush? Show us your favorite piece. Okay, so Geeky's suggesting I show one of my favorite pieces. So I have a lot. Obviously, I've been sculpting for some time. Let me think through that as I show you a little bit about the difference between box modeling and sculpting. So let me jump through this really quick, Geeky, and then I'll pull up some stuff. My current favorite is the model I showed last week, which is the troll with the little mini trolls on their shoulder and on the barrel. That's one of my favorites. There's this character. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and open that up. There's a character that I worked on quite some time ago that I would say is on my list of favorites. Let's see if I can bring him up. Oh, I need to go to the GUI Cube stuff. So here's one of my favorite characters for all of you to see. And his name is Father Geeky, if you didn't already know. And he was a heck of a lot of fun. And what's neat is that this was a collaborative effort, right? So there was an illustration pretty much of just, I think, the shoulders and above of this character, Father Geeky. And in his description, it mentioned he had a hand that was replaced with a trident. And so I started working on it, and then I read more, and it turns out that Father Geeky has a prosthetic leg. And so I reached out to Geeky and Alphinius Goo, and I said, so what kind of leg does he have? And Geeky first responded with, well, he's got a peg leg. I'm like, no, I get it, but you're in a fantasy world. What do you want that peg to be? And we bounced our ideas back and forth, and I suggested, well, how about a crab leg? You know, he's this seafaring guy, lives on an island. He made some deal with a goddess of the sea, something along those lines. And I know that Geeky really fell in love with that idea. So I had a lot of fun sculpting the leg on this character. Let me zoom in if I can get to the right screen. And you can see, well, I'll explain some things you'll see in a minute. But you can see the leg is this spiky crab leg. And that was a ton of fun. And so the other thing that was interesting about this project, I made the character originally as the proportions of a human. And I only found out later that he was maroon, and they're proportioned more like a dwarf. And so I had to make adjustments to the sculpt to make that happen. So the other thing that you'll notice in this model is how big the trident staff is. And I actually had to make later adjustments to the trident in his hand so that when it printed, it wasn't too fragile. And this is a difference between what I sculpt and what someone might sculpt for a video game, or they might sculpt for a movie. They don't have to worry about how it exists in the physical world. What I print is generally an inch tall, and it's made of a resin plastic material. And so it can be very fragile and very brittle. And so I have to engineer around that. So that's when you change from being an artist and a sculptor to kind of engineering. And as I mentioned before, that's not my strength. I don't love that, but you learn how to deal with it and you learn to make adjustments. The other thing that I was able to bring to my digital work is I used to sculpt with green stuff, with basically an epoxy putty and I would sculpt 1 inch tall. So I was very familiar with those limitations and things. So definitely something that you guys can pick up if you look at it. So really quick, so now that I've shown Geeky this model, I'm going to take a step back and show you guys some other things. So ZBrush is not the only software that you can use for this kind of stuff. There's a free product called Blender. It's used for animation, modeling, and those kinds of projects. But they also have a module for sculpting. So you can do 3D modeling and sculpting within the product. And you have to put it on a computer. It's not like something you could put on a phone or something. But it's very, very powerful, and it's free. So if money is an issue for you, but you have a powerful enough computer, you could sculpt using Blender. Now, I haven't used Blender in a long time. I tried it a couple of times, and I just couldn't figure out the interface. I've learned a lot since then, so I'd probably be more comfortable with it today. But I've invested a lot in learning ZBrush. So lots of hours, lots of energy. So I'm very comfortable with it. And so moving to a different piece of software has been difficult for me. The other thing that's really cool lately is if you have a tablet computer like an iPad or a Google device, Android device, there are 3D sculpting software available on those. So Forger is a software that you can use on an iPad, and you can see the kind of work people have been able to do with this application on their pad, on their tablet. And very, very cool. There's another one on iPad for iPad called Nomad, and these are some of the projects people have been able to deliver. And again, very powerful software, really cool stuff. And yes, you can export to STL or OBJ. So some of them are limited. This is a question from Geeky. So can you export STLs from these packages? Blender, almost any file type. For Forger and Nomad, it may not be STL. It could be OBJ. The good news is that the software used to convert it for printing can read an STL or an OBJ. So both file types would be able to be done. And those software can usually convert an OBJ to an STL. And I'll talk more about that when we get into 3D printing. And then if you have an Android device, I found this software called Sculpt Plus, and again, the examples they're showing are pretty amazing of what people can do with this software. And I'm not an Android person. I have Apple devices. I have an iPad and I have an iPhone. But again, there's some cool stuff out there. So I wanted to talk through that really quickly for people. And these are sculpting packages, so it's the kind of workflow that I use, and I'll show you guys more about that in just a minute. The other thing that I wanted to let everybody know, that when I'm in ZBrush and I'm moving stuff around and making things look cool, I'm using a reference, right? So any artist, somebody that's been through school, will talk about references all the time. And you just don't want your brain to fool you. You want to actually have the real objects to model from, even if you're doing something fantasy, right? So proportions are really important in the human form or humanoid related forms, right? So you want to make sure you understand where the arms should fall, how the muscles work, what a smile looks like, because your mind plays tricks on you. And if you draw, sometimes you'll do the smile, but it's dead looking because you're not adjusting the eyes or the eyebrows or the cheeks, because you just, create this circle or this half circle and call it a smile. And that's the difference between somebody who's modeling something that's somewhat realistic based in reality versus someone that's just making a cartoon. And so you just have to decide on your style. But even those that are doing stylized things that aren't real are using references. And I can talk about references maybe in another session if people are interested in that. But love to share more about my process. I can show you guys ZBrush now. But I mean, so for example, I just use search on Google, and I just searched on Skull, and you get lots and lots of references. The other one that sometimes can be really neat is Pinterest. So you're getting some of the same results in Pinterest when you search, but oftentimes you can actually add things. So you're getting artwork. Maybe you want to understand how people adjust the human form for fantasy or for science fiction or for whatever you're doing. And a skull is a good example of that. The human skull has no expression, right? And if you see a skull like of a skeleton in movies or in art, they're putting expressions on it, which the skull doesn't do. So they're actually adjusting the form of the front of the skull, adding eyebrows, moving those eyebrows. So they might bring the center of the eyebrow down to make it look more menacing. All those kinds of things are cool. Well, you want to see that in action maybe. And so Pinterest is a great place to find that kind of stuff. And as long as you're just using it as a reference, no harm, no foul, right? You don't want to take that image, paste it into ZBrush and then run with it. It's just to give you ideas. And then how you then view those references when you're working on a project, I'll talk about another day, because you basically create a library of references for the project you're working on. Like if you're doing a creature, and I'll show you the creature in a second, I did these compound creatures just for fun. So I did a moth lion and I did a wasp wolf. Tons of fun. And what's great about those is I could get references of wasps and other stinging insects, references of different kind of wolves, put them together, and I got a wasp wolf, and it was a fun sculpt, and it looks great on the table. Similar to a moth lion. In the world of Zayate, there are winged lions and felines and similar creatures, and I just wanted it to be different, when I made mine. Making a bird wings. I mean, I just seen so many versions of a winged lion with these eagle-like wings. And I said, well, what else can I do? I was chatting with my son, and he said, how about a moth lion? I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. So that's what I built, and I'll show you those here as I bring ZBrush back. Let's see. Not there. And not there. So here you can see the moth lion that I created, and they're not completely moth accurate wings. I created these layered wings instead of one or two single wings, and I thought it just added more interest for the wings. It does have it has the moth antenna for the lion, and then the mane is, I tried to make it textured. So could it be insect-like? Could it be fur? It's up to you how you paint it. Great question, Geeking. I'm going to show that in just a second. So these are some of the finished products, just to give you an idea of what's possible. And let me jump to, I'm just going to start with the sphere. Let me make this. And I did this last time, but I'm going to spend a little more time. So I'm going to move my microphone just a little bit so I can work. And if you can't hear me, just drop it in chat and I will talk louder or find a way to so you can hear me. So I work with a stylus. It actually allows me a lot more control. Trying to do art with a mouse on a computer, not for me. Just not for me. It's just not a very precise tool. So getting a drawing pad for your computer is just another investment. So that's again, an Android tablet or an iPad already have the concept of a stylus, right? So that can sometimes be easier. And most of the applications for those two devices are a little bit cheaper than what you might use for on a computer. ZBrush is expensive. I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression. It's expensive. It's been well worth it for me personally, and I've had the wherewithal to spend that money. So first, let me show you. Let me jump to another object. So I mentioned box modeling, and so that's basically what this is. So I've just got a cube, and let me show you so you can see that it's actually made up of multiple cubes. And so with the software, I can just, model out. Let me turn on symmetry because we're making a character. Let me move to the view. So the nice thing about ZBrush, if you can see up in the corner, in fact, I'm going to get rid of my face so you guys can actually see the whole screen. So up in the corner, you can see this face. The primary use of this face is so I know where the model is facing. So this is face front, and the X and Y, the X axis left and right, and the Y axis up and down, and the Z axis goes back to front. So let me remove the little extra thing. So with symmetry turned on, if I just extrude crazy little arms, really fast, really easy, and then I can add, kind of make it another cube. Okay, now what have I got? I've got really weird legs. Well, most creatures have 4 legs, so let's take a look at how I might do that. And let's create some lines there. Now I've got that. Okay, so that's how fast, and I could do that again, and I could make a bug, right? And so if you're concepting, this can be super useful because, okay, now does this bug have 4 legs? Does it have 8 legs? What do I want to do? I'm kind of liking this right now, and I can show you another thing that you want to keep track of, and that's this white rectangle up on the upper left is showing you a silhouette of the model. So if you're into any kind of graphic design or character creation, you want the silhouette to make sense. So from the top, that silhouette's pretty cool. The front legs are a little bit further in than the back legs, but if you look at it from the side, the front legs are short, so this thing wouldn't be able to stand. So maybe I just add some more length. Okay, now I have a problem because the legs are just not matching up. So what I'm going to do, turn on a floor so I can be a little more accurate. And I'm going to try and just make it to the floor. Still struggling. So you can see if I want to be really careful about it or perfect about it, it's going to take a little effort. So let's see. That's pretty close. And I'm going to cheat real quick because I know how. And I'm going to make them the same. All right, get rid of the floor because it's distracting for me personally. Now I have this bug creature, 4-legged bug creature. And what else might I do? Well, I need some kind of head. So again, I'm still concepting. So let's give it a neck of some kind. And maybe a head. Now I've got this bug with a really cool head, right? But it's a little small for me, so let's give it some shape. Maybe give it something below the neck. right? So this is box modeling. But again, it's really fast to get your idea out, which is why it's popular. And if I was making a robot, this would be, really fast way to design that robot. Now, I'd have to worry about how the legs moved and things like that. Now, the next thing the computer can do is what's called a subdivision. And what it's doing is it's just multiplying the number of polygons. So every one of these rectangles, this square, these purple squares, those are polygons, basically something with multiple sides. And so 4 sides is best when you're subdividing. I can talk about this in a technical detail later, but when you're subdividing, what it's doing is it's basically multiplying by 4. So this one square is going to become 4, and by just dividing it. Well, the other thing the computer's going to do, because it's dividing it, is try and smooth it out. So you can see now it's not so boxy. It's actually looking pretty good. Well, let's do that again, and it's even smoother. And that's something you can do on the computer. So as you're figuring out this concept, you can use these subdivisions to see what it's going to look like when it's smoothed out. And so if I go ahead, and I'm going to have to go back. I was just showing you as an example, so I'm going to show it another way. So here I am with those subdivisions again. And let's make it have some kind of snout thing, right? So you can see what that looks like smoothed. And then here's what it looks like as a box. And if you have practice, you can do the box first before you add the other details. Let's say I want that. Now, when I subdivide it, this is what my creature's looking like. So this could be lots of different things. And it's interesting, you'll notice that in the back, the legs got shorter as it was adding all those extra polygons. And in the front, it's longer. And the reason is because I have, if I turn off this thing, this back leg is one piece, one polygon. In the front, it's 2 polygons. So it's going to be multiplying in a different way. So if I get rid of that extra polygon, and then now the legs are virtually the same size, but I didn't have them perfectly aligned, even though it looked like it on screen. And I can make that adjustment now or later, or even do something totally weird now. This is another thing you can do when you're modeling, and it's called masking. And so I can protect part of the model and just adjust another part. And the adjustment I'm going to make is tilt the back of this bug down. Let me add the floor back so that it touches the ground. Let's see. Oh, I know what I have to do. I have this sphere here. I need to move it off the floor so I can focus on this. So I can tilt this until they both reach the floor. Now it's added a little more interest. And so if I look at my silhouette again, it's a little more interesting for the creature to have this back legs like down. And then maybe I can do something similar to the front, except I need to protect the legs now too. And then I can just tilt the head maybe. The way this bug, works is the neck and the head is below the shoulders. Yeah, I like that a lot. And so again, this is a very simple model, but I'm already looking like it's going to be creepy. It's really going to be creepy. Let me check chat. Very bug looking, absolutely. Any questions so far from anybody and seeing what I'm doing here? You guys there's 5 of you. So you have my undivided attention if there's questions you want to know. And we can keep working on this bug if you want to. Let me jump and try and do the same thing with this sphere. Right? So I want to make a similar bug creature, but I want to just sculpt. I don't want to use box modeling. And this was me, 5 years ago. I hated box modeling. Now I'm very used to it. I can use it for ideation and things like that. Um, let's see what do I want to do here. Yeah, I like that better. Turn it off. So I'm not looking at the squares and the pixel. I'm just having a sphere. So the first thing I do, I want to flatten this body out a little bit. So I have some tools to do that. So I can get that narrow body we had on the other one. Then I want to do some other modeling. So we turn symmetry on again. I can change my brush size, and let's give him some front legs. All right, give him some back legs. Okay, that looks okay. Smooth them out a little bit. Now I need that neck and head, so let's do that. Now I need a head. So I'm just inflating out some kind of head. He's actually even creepier because if you think about it, he might even be a human that's thrown into a position where he's crawling around on the ground. So part of what you like to do when you're doing this ideation and these concepting is see what it might be, right? Think how creepy this would be if it's a dude, crawling on his hands and feet. And so then you can play with that idea. So I protected part of the model. Ooh, gave him a really long neck. Don't like that as much. But let's turn his head. See, a human would have to have his head up so he could see. All right, now I've got something creepier. And just so you guys see the same human I do, let's make him more human-like. And again, this is, like I said, I don't have to care how many polygons there are. If they are polygons, I can just start sculpting. Let's give him some brows here and make a character. And I'm relatively familiar with anatomy, so I can go fast because I'm concepting. I might later change him, but let's get this dude going. Maybe that's a little too much, so let's move this down some. Yeah, bone centipede. That sounds really cool. Right. Doesn't have much of a chin, so let's give him a chin. Doesn't look so weak. We'd even give him. I'm looking at him going, let's just give him a beard and a mustache. Adam's apple. All right. Other thing I can tell you is I suck at ears, right? So I've made them a trillion times. The good news is you can make your own brushes. These are all the brushes that are available to me at the moment, and I have more stored somewhere else. But there's human features available. So let's give this dude, actually that doesn't look very human-like. Let's get one that looks more human. Oh, it was already on one. So I can give it an ear. Now he's really starting to look good. And let's make some craziness happen. So you can quickly get an idea, and let's look at the whole dude. You don't want to spend all your time on the face. You want to see how it works with the rest of this thing. Well, his legs are pretty spindly, but I'm kind of liking this dude. So what do we do next, right? So he needs hands. Let me increase my brush size so I can give him some hands. So I like, I'm roughing out the shapes, and then you add the detail later. So if you focus too much on the detail now, then your silhouette gets wonky, or you're going to have to make changes. And making changes when you have a ton of details probably not what you want to do. In fact, I like the hands. Let's protect the mini again. Actually, let me change my mask brush. So I'm just working with the hands now. And what I'm thinking is that he'd have his hands rotated out. Right? So let's rotate them out. Yeah, I like that a lot. And I can add the fingers and stuff later once we know that's what we want. In fact, you can see, because I protected so much of the model, it actually moved it a little in a weird way. I guess now he kind of looks like he's wearing a shirt. Right? So then the other thing, give it a hat. Oh, yeah. He's a wizard. He has to wear a hat. So the other thing to be aware of in a tool like this, if you've worked in Photoshop or similar software, you work in layers. Well, in a ZBrush, you have a similar concept. They're called subtools. And so I can actually insert another tool, right? Let me do something and turn off the robot dude. And now I have a cylinder that I can just manipulate independently of the rest of the model. And so for things like hats or belts or even clothes, I might do them separately. And actually, I'm going to do a little box modeling here because I want to make the hat different. So turn on my lines again so I can see what I'm doing. So I just have this idea for a hat, so I'm going to make it real quick. And that actually looks pretty good. So now, whoops, we can move it back to the top of his head. Make it a little bigger. Tilt it back because he's kind of a casual guy. And so, yeah, this is a wizard because he's wearing a hat. And I need to apply my changes. I'm going to make his head tilt over. Okay. Why aren't you letting me do that? It's saving. Takes a second. One thing to be aware of when you're working digitally and pretending it's clay, it's still calculating a lot of math. And so if you do something that the math can't handle, it will crash. And I've spent hours on projects sometimes and didn't realize, and then ran made an adjustment or whatever, and then lost the whole thing. So whenever you're working with this kind of software, you're definitely going to want to frequently save your work. This has an autosave feature, which is helpful. So now I've got this wild wizard's hat on this crawling wizard, right? So he's looking pretty good. Let's see, what do we want to do? He needs some feet. And his arms and legs are very, very thin, but that's okay for right now. So I'm just going to grab his feet. Do something crazy here. Just give myself some material to work with. And then, you're basically just moving stuff around. Almost like I said, if you're working in clay, you pretty much add some material, add some clay back to the model, and then you start moving that clay around. And you have lots of different options. Again, I use only a couple of brushes. Moving clay around is something I'm very comfortable with, but there's other things you could potentially use. Um, a lot of people, let me unprotect the model. A lot of people use this kind of build up in clay, so they're like, okay, he's going to get some pants. Let's thicken up his legs, and then you can have stuff like that happen. Again, you're talking about software. You wouldn't do that with clay. Luckily, I know how to fix that. And so I'm going to fix it. I'm adding clay. I'm giving him pants. And you can still see the computer struggling. Let me zoom in a bit. You can see how the computer is struggling with some of this stuff. And so you have to be careful, especially if you're going to try and print it. So I'm going to zoom in even more. And so some of these areas where the little red dot's moving could be a problem, because if this point goes through another point, so there's no way you can print that. You can't have parts of the model cutting through other parts of the model. You know, the math just doesn't work. And so that's probably too much smoothing. Let me change my brush size. Actually, that looks okay. Let's go bigger. So I smooth that out, and I can smooth some of this out. So I'm removing some of those things. I keep getting a warning. Don't worry about it. So now, you know, I have this concept of pants, and then I could add the detail to the pants later. You know, but let's give them some cuffs. You know, they're dress pants, so they have to have cuffs at the bottom. You know. And since he's stylized, I mean, there's things you don't have to do. You don't have to worry about creases, for example, and things like that. Okay, I see Geeky asking another question. So how long do you spend on each model? So it depends. It's hard for me to judge. I would say a standard character model with a lot of stuff like the tridents, the peg legs, and things like that. Probably about 8 hours to 10 hours to make a decent looking character. And then you can keep going and going and going. The troll that I made, he probably was 2 or 3 times that, because there was a lot of detail I wanted to add. So he's got a club made of leather. So I wanted to make sure that the stitches showed so you can see it wasn't made of wood. I banded it with iron and had to put the rivets on it. His boots had a ton of detail. In fact, I can open that model and show everybody. I believe I know where it is. It doesn't like what's happening, so it won't let me save it. So let me open a tool and see if I can find my trolls. No, I don't want to. Why is the troll so small? So you can see in this particular character the extra details. So he's got these boots. There's straps across the top of the boots with buckles and holes for the buckle to connect into. It's got this jewelry that hangs from the front that has some kind of gemstone. There's some kind of cloth that, you know, ripples underneath the folded top. There's rivets on the inside plus rivets on the top. That took extra time and effort, right? And then he has these straps on his legs that have buckles. Here's the But I was telling you, this leather club or sap, you can see the gathering of the leather and the stitches, right? So Bubba Ray Goo, yeah. And then he's got, there's just a lot going on just on him, right? And then I have similar boots. Luckily, I was able to reuse the boots and just make them smaller, reuse the leather club and make it smaller. But then you have, the little guys I had to make. I was able to duplicate. The guy added a cigar, but I had the cigar from the big guy, so I was able to, take advantage of having that. I tried different textures on his shoulders and his chin, so that took multiple rounds. So this is probably 20 hours of work, but I was entering a competition, so I did put a lot of extra effort, hoping to win. They haven't announced the winners yet. And I will make this available for people. It prints as two pieces, the little mini troll, mini me on the barrel, and then the main troll with his mini me on his shoulders. They're two different pieces. But he's a lot of fun. I painted him up. He was a lot of fun to paint. And again, he probably took one of the longest. A creature is faster. So if I still have the moth line in here somewhere. So this creature, I could go faster because I don't have to worry about boots or belts or posing him and then moving the belt around, right? So when you model the character, you're modeling him in a symmetrical pose. Then you have to pose him somewhat dynamically. Like I moved this lion up into this rampant pose. Well, with an animal, all I have to worry about is if the fur gets messed up. With a human, their shirt's going to move, their pants are going to move, their boots, their belts, their pouches, the weapon's going to have to move. And so there's a lot more effort after you've created the character that you have to do before you print it. Because you can tell the silhouette here is super dramatic with this rampant lion. And even the front silhouette is dramatic. You can see in the silhouette. So this one turned out really, really good. And so I do have one where he's on all fours. It still looks majestic, but I like this rampant pose better. But it was much, much easier to do this. And so this is probably 4 to 6 hours. And since I've done lions before, I was able to reuse the body, changed the mane, and then added the wings, the antenna, changed the tail a bit, and then changed the texture. So if I don't know if you can see on the screen, let me zoom in real close. So his legs have this leather skin texture. And while on screen it doesn't look awesome, it works really well when it's printed. Again, here's zoomed in. And here's what he would look like. Oh, I think he's a little bigger on the table. So about this big on the table. So for certain printers, that texture of his lower legs won't even show. And so you don't want to overdo it, but he prints out really nice and he paints up really nice. And so I love creatures because it's more character design. With a character like this troll, after you do his face and a little bit around the shoulders, everything else is costuming, right? Making these cool boots, the raggedy skirt thing he's got going, suspenders. I mean, that's not sculpting for me personally. That's just making a model look cool. But the face was what I had the most fun with, right? As you can see, that was a lot of fun, right? And he even has really little bitty ears that you can hardly see, and the little guys have little bitty ears. I started without ears, but I liked it. He's got a crew cut. Let me see if I can get rid of his buddy. So he's got this crew cut that you don't see because his buddy's riding him. And so that all of those things are a lot of fun. But adding the arm straps I knew would look really cool, but that's more of a mechanical effort to make it look cool than creating the character. So a lot of times what I'm doing, like if I'm doing a character for the GUI family, um, you're spending more time on the costume. Once you get the likeness of the face, it's all about the costume and the pose. Like, Geeky. And Geeky has a really, let's see if I have his model. Wow, you can see his teeth. Um, his pose is very simple, right? It's a simple pose. He's just holding out, and then I bent the arm in front of his body, so it looks somewhat interesting. But part of it was to make sure you could see the peg leg. Didn't want the cloak draping over it. You want to be able to see the trident in his hand, and the one on his the prosthetic, and then it doesn't show as much when you paint it unless you really, really focus on contrast. He's got this really fancy eye patch, but it prints so small, most people aren't going to see it on the tabletop because, as we talked about, most people are going to see it about that big, right? Maybe a little bigger, right? That's what you're going to see. So actually seeing the eye patch, the painter would have to very carefully create contrast, usually with a black outline around it and then a different color inside. So you'd see the color of his face, then the eye patch, and then whatever the details are. Okay. I'm jumping between screens. I don't really mean to do that. But I've had really fun showing you some stuff. I'll keep that concept bug and the guy on all fours. We'll work on that some more in future episodes. I do really want to make sure we keep this interesting, but not really take too much of everybody's time. But this has been a ton of fun. I really love the feedback. Geeky, you've really dominated the chat. So hopefully some of you will have questions in the future. But Phantom, Geeky, Conan D, Shells. I mean, it's just been great having you here, sharing the conversation and sharing the stream. Love having you participate. It's been wonderful. And I will see everybody in a week.